people who have, been to the extremes of suicidal ideation and recognizing a different way to view life that brought them a new sense of freedom. People are starting, I think, to really understand the mirage of what it is to be on planet Earth and how many of the stories and facades that are out there are truly illusions.
Your main product is freedom.
Most people's sense of choice is figurative. It's not actual choice. Life is revelatory, meaning it's a dissolution process. We're not trying to adorn things, even though that's how the human brain works, right? I need more of something, whether it's status, fame, money, recognition, self-worth. But that's an accumulative process, which is actually the precursor to sickness and disease. Really a shift in one's state. We would go from what I would assert is a state of tension and suffering and dis-ease, and we start to really experience an inner state of freedom. With that, then typically comes immediately a sense of real love and appreciation for oneself, for life.
And a lot of people can crumble in the face of that uncertainty.
So that to me is everything is in life is purely for the purpose of liberating the soul you are.
Before today's transmission, I wanted to take a minute to let you in on something that could change your life. If you've been doing the inner work and still feel like you're walking this path alone, you're not the only one. Most spiritual spaces give you endless content to consume, but not a tribe to grow with. That's why we created the Deep Dive, a living spiritual ecosystem designed to help you grow in community, rhythm, and real embodiment. Right now, our members are embarking on a journey exploring a core spiritual and practical teaching through daily activations, live community gatherings guided by me and our facilitators, and also participating in sacred challenges that are designed to help you live your practice and bring it to life. You'll be surrounded by seekers and leaders who've decided that they're done doing this work in isolation. If you're ready to find your people, visit the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen right now, and I'll see you inside.
Peter Crone, welcome on Just Tap In, brother. What are you most excited about right now globally and in your life?
Wow. Well, firstly, thanks for having me, Emilio. It's a pleasure to connect with you, and I really appreciate the little prelude you took us through. It was really beautiful. What am I most excited about? I think maybe easy to start with my own life before I get into the global perspective. I continue to be humbled, I think, by the number of people who are discovering my work, which is evident in a myriad of ways. One, the number of messages we get, the DMs we get, even friends of mine that I haven't spoken to for years who are somehow suddenly touched by my work in a way that they didn't really understand before. And, wherever I go, I get stopped continually by people with the most beautiful words of love and gratitude for whatever it is that they heard that helped shift the course of maybe a trying time they were going through, or even people who have, been to the extremes of suicidal ideation and recognizing a different way to view life that brought them a new sense of freedom. So that continues to bring me an immense amount of joy. And then with that, all the opportunities that are being brought to me of people who want to either join my Mastermind program, want me to speak in different places around the world. They want to work with me one-on-one. It's very gratifying. And then to sort of extrapolate that out into the global view, I think, with the likes of you, platforms, and myself and guests that you have, people are starting, I think, to really understand the mirage of what it is to be on planet Earth and how many of the stories and normal, everyday sort of facades that are out there are truly illusions, and that people are starting to look beyond the lies and the corruption and recognize that there is a unified field on the other side of these constraints, and tapping into that and sharing in their own communities, their own little families. And that's what's encouraging to me, that even in the face of still a lot of adversity and manipulation and domination and tyranny that people are just not buying into it anymore. And I feel very flattered to be part of that movement, to wake people up, and recognize their own sovereignty, their own divinity, and really tap into what I call this new world of freedom, love, and possibility that's on the other side of the collective limitations that people have been, suffering within. So that to me is something that I can stand behind, and I'm looking forward to actualizing.
And there's obviously something to say there around the expansion of this type of work, around what people are seeking out now more and more of. You've told me that your main product is freedom. And so in what ways do you feel the collective or people in general are, in a way, finding themselves pulled more toward understanding what freedom is, and how then your work plays into that as well?
I think it's sort of one of those inevitable pursuits, because I would assert, without sounding too esoterical, that our nature is freedom. That's who we are, right? It's not so much that I, individual self, siloed in the illusion of separation, am free. That's good. That's relative to most people, that's more advanced. But really to recognize that the nature of consciousness itself and who we are as souls or beings is freedom itself. And so through the laws of relativity, when we don't experience that, we suffer, right? We feel confined, we feel limited, we feel trapped, we feel frustrated. And so it's by really investigating the validity of the things that keep us confined and recognizing, hang on a minute, I don't have to do what my parents told me I should do. Or I don't have to do what a high school teacher suggested I do. I don't have to do what my boss tells me, and not in a way to be, rebellious or defiant, but really to see that there's this power of choice beneath all of it, and that most people just haven't exercised that. So I think it's the merging of, oneself with one's true nature finally, as opposed to the ultimate addiction, which is the idea of ourself that's founded typically in some sort of feeling of inadequacy, insecurity, or scarcity, which, propagates this sense of fear. And people are, as they say, sick and tired of being sick and tired, and realizing it just doesn't have to be that way.
Have you ever found in your life that there's a cap on our choice, the choices that we have in our life?
100%. I delineate choice in one of two ways. There's literal and there's figurative, right? So most people's sense of choice is figurative. It's not actual choice, because people are conditioned, unbeknownst to themselves, to the wiring and the programming based on genetics and the way they were brought up and the various narratives that they've subscribed to, whether it be the dogmas of religion or their particular community and what they should do because of what their parents suggested, or even the fact that maybe their parents were doctors, and so ipso facto that means they should be a doctor. So choice at that level is always figurative. What I'm interested in is literal choice, the empowerment of like me choosing consciously who I be and the way that I behave, act, and consequences of that in results of my life. So there are definitely different iterations of choice. Most people are oblivious to the fact that they even have that power. There's really a feeling of they have to do something, they should do something, they must do something, they need to do something. And all of those words I tell, and I teach people in my mastermind, they're all founded in resistance. Like if you feel the language and the tone of I have to do something, now you're in resistance to the underlying implication of choice, right? If I need to do this, you're now obliged, right? You're sort of a slave to your own narratives. And so actually understanding truly the nature of choice is itself liberation.
Mm-hmm. One thing you talk a lot about is true nature, our true nature, and also the soul beyond the mind. As a bridge, you say that the mind is that bridge between the soul, the body, the human, the being.
Yeah.
I'd really love to understand from that level of choice when it comes to our soul, and we're confronted with these infinite possibilities in our life, and we start to realize that there's a quantum field and then all these timelines that open up to us. Is there a certain, let's say, avenue or path that is more aligned and coherent for that soul, rather than just making these choices on, like, I could say I could be a firefighter for, the day of tomorrow. But when I make that choice, how do I know that that's truly in that alignment with my soul, with my true nature?
Great question. And the sort of short response is you don't, right? So we never really know. And I would assert that's the nature of life, is exploration. It's curiosity. It's consciousness wanting to know itself. So the very underlying driving force for all human beings is really curiosity. And so we never really know, but what we can, after the fact, and sometimes very quickly, and sometimes it takes a while, we can recognize to what degree does that resonate, with the proclivity that I have as a soul to be here to learn whatever it is to learn. Typically, the learning is less about like something to do, and it's more about recognizing what's in the way of who we are, right? So I say life is revelatory, meaning it's a dissolution process. We're not trying to adorn things, even though that's how the human brain works, right? I need more of something, whether it's status, fame, money, recognition, self-worth. But that's an accumulative process, which is actually the precursor to sickness and disease. So really, through my work, it's actually a dissolution process. What we're doing in terms of finding what does align with our nature is this something that reinforces constraint, or is this something that transcends it and helps me discover true freedom? So it's less in the vocation of what we do, firefighter, doctor, insurance broker, or whatever you do. And simultaneously, it's less to do with the people that we're with. We all get caught up on the addiction of the romantic relationships that we've all been caught up in, and the love and the loss and all the grief and the drama. And I think, if you can step back a little bit and see that all of it is just a reflection, it's a mirror within which we get to see where are we not free, then it lightens the tension and the resistance that we tend to have to life, to vocations, and to people, and more focus becomes on where can I learn something from these interactions where I'm not okay with life, where I get upset, I suffer, and really start to see the opportunity to transcend that and then discover our true nature beneath it. So I wouldn't get too preoccupied with what we do or what it looks like or who we with, and really learn from, regardless of the circumstances, the degree to which we're still confined.
You said one of the things that's allowed you to reach these different awarenesses has been to try to fold the mind back on itself. And I'd love to understand the mechanics of what that is, to fold the mind back onto itself, and how these deeper, obviously, like whoever's tuning in right now can understand and have a feeling and a felt sense of the depth that comes through your words. And that's been through folding the mind back onto itself. What are the mechanics behind that?
We could get really esoteric and philosophical, but I like to try and keep it simple for the benefit of the listener. So really, it's about self-inquiry, right? It's about the ability to reflect. So you have a thought, you have a feeling, you have a belief. And it's really the question, well, is that really who I am or what I'm a stand for? Or is it even true in the first place, right? So that's the folding back. It's we could call it discernment. We could call it inquiry. We could call it curiosity again. It's right. Rather than being defined by I am statements, like, in the world of religion, like people really think that they're Christian, or they really think that they're, they're Hindu or Jewish, or they're Catholic, or they're Muslim, or whatever it is. Like, these aren't truths, right? These are adopted narratives, typically because you were born in a family that adopted them themselves. And so it's sort of ipso facto, well, then that's who I am. Not realizing that that perpetuates the sense of separation and division that is the core of human suffering around the planet. So the ability to really inquire into your own declarations about yourself is folding back on and asking, a very simple question: is that really true? Like, is it really true that I'm Peter Crone? It's not a truth; it's a placeholder. It puts me in time and space, and it locates me, and it's helpful. But it's not my nature. When I was born, I was alive. I had cells. I was eating. I was defecating. I was sleeping. I existed in a sense of beingness. I didn't know my name. I didn't know my nationality. These are all things that get adorned on top of the being that we are over time, until such time that we really identify with this idea of ourself, which typically is founded in some sense of inadequacy, insecurity, and scarcity. And as a result, then we go through our life forging, as best as we can through willpower, our status on the world and trying to be who we think we should be based on our own beliefs, not realizing that they're made up in the first place. So when you start to see it, you recognize why most people aren't that well or that happy, and typically on some sort of medication, whether it's prescribed or self-declared. So that's the folding back on, is really constantly asking, as many of the spiritual traditions would say, the question of who am I? And but most people are really convinced that they are who they think they are, and that's the slippery path to suffering.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned these placeholders that put us into time and space being this identity that we've formed or created for ourselves. Like, I am Emilio, you are Peter, you do this is your work, this is your life, this is your family. What does happen? What begins to occur in someone's life when they make the conscious effort to go beyond time and space? Because if consciousness has no limits, no bounds, and we can get to that point, what begins to occur in someone's actual life when they start playing in those realms, I would say?
I think prior to anything happening in their actual life, there's really a shift in one's state, right? So we would go from what I would assert as a state of tension and suffering and dis-ease, which can manifest even physiologically over time when people get sick. And we start to really experience an inner state of, my work freedom. With that, then typically comes immediately a sense of real love and appreciation for oneself, for life. And then we open up to the myriad of possibilities in the quantum, where there's just nothing that's not available from that place. So that's the first experience, is usually the absence of constraint, and the Ayurvedic expressions of like healing and sickness and ending that. There's the analogy of taking off a tight shoe, so for any of the female listeners who've, because of the inordinate amount of pressure that's put on appearance for women, they have to go out and they wear their heels and whatever, but looks great, but maybe not comfortable. They come home and kick them off, and there's this sort of sense of relief. I would say it's that, but like 1000x, because it's the real being that you're experiencing in the absence of the constraints of your own ego, right? So it's like, oh, I feel so good, so there's this feeling of peace and liberation that can cascade through every cell of our body. And then how that manifests in life, if you were to witness it, you might not see somebody look that different. Typically their face would seem a little softer, their demeanor would seem a little bit more approachable. You might sort of intuitively feel that you can share things with that person that previously you wouldn't have done. Even animals are typically drawn to someone like that. So you would see some subtle changes, but they might even keep the same job. They might stay in the same marriage or stay single, whatever they're doing. But it would be living from a completely different place. So instead of coming from a space of survival where they're constantly trying to make it, living from fear, trying to force outcomes, trying to forge their own name into the community to get a garner a sense of acceptance or self-worth, there would be a peace about them. There's nothing really now to do or to say. It's really, there's just a tranquility and a contentment that is palpable, especially for people that know them. You're not really trying to get anywhere. You're really fully embodied in where you are. Like, you have a whole new experience of presence. They would be better listeners. There would probably be less noise and more observation. Then on the flip side, you can also see people who tap into that, and I've witnessed it, where there's just such a sense of jubilation and joy that they, realize that they've wanted to travel the world their entire life, but they never allowed themselves because they thought they had to keep their 9 to 5, or they do suddenly get divorced because they realize that their marriage was just a facade. And, so there can be sometimes dramatic changes. So it runs the gamut. There's no real kind of clear path for the recently enlightened, but there is internally a distinct feeling of newfound freedom and peace relative to the previous sense of fear and suffering. So it's more an internal job. And then some people choose to live a very quiet, simple life, and some people go full out, freedom has many faces.
How do you see the evolution of humanity playing out right now, especially with right now, as you said, there's so much dissolvement happening in our limitations and things that we put on ourselves that keep us in these prisons. Where do you sort of sense that evolution of the new human is becoming once these layers get shed or dissolved, in your words? And do you feel that the mind is playing a new role that it hadn't played before now?
For sure. I mean, I can't obviously predict exactly where it's going to go. I know I have my intentions, and so with my work, which is, my company that I formed 20 something years ago, the vision statement was to inspire the realization of a new type of human being. So I'm very, proud, dedicated, committed to that particular cause. And that's what I help people realize through my mastermind and my work, which is super fulfilling. So hopefully that sort of wins the race. But I also know that there's a lot of division out right now, and people are really caught up in the dramas and the indiscretions and the harm and the abuse, which is unfortunately replete. And there's a lot of it out there, So I know that it pisses people off, and I'm with them, but when people start to realize that the current dimension of what it is to be human is based on an old operating system that doesn't work anymore, really my gift as humanity, if I had one, is to deliver this new operating system. So it really is the update to the human mind that has never really been upgraded. We've always lived in the world of limitation, fear, suffering, disease, disharmony, and scarcity. That's what we know. And then we do whatever we can to survive that, right? And some dominate, and they have abundance and control and power and a sense of, status. And some people are just like trying to keep their head above water every day. So, but it's redundant to have these conversations in the old dimension. It's like Einstein said, you can't solve a problem from within the same level of consciousness that created it, right? So for me, I'm paraphrasing terribly, but there's a beautiful quote by Buckminster Fuller. He said, to change reality, you don't, shift the current model, you create a new model that makes the old one obsolete. And so that's really what I'm doing, is creating a new model for what it is to be a human being who's no longer confined by their own narratives of limitation and fear and suffering and dis-ease, but rather stepping into a world of freedom, love, possibility, and vitality. And that's an entirely different model. So that's my intention. That's my hope for humanity. But I'm just one cog in a very big machine. And so whether, quote unquote, I win or the forces that be with digital IDs and more tyranny and confinement win, I don't know. We'll see. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all consciousness exploring itself. So I'll enjoy the show.
You said a cog in a machine, but at the same time playing a huge role in that machine and in all the testimonials that are coming through. And just for a moment, I wanted to scope out into really how incredible it is, a time that we're living, where we have organizations like the Noetic Institute, the Monroe Institute, studying telepathy, telekinesis, consciousness, remote viewing. And then we go over to other, people in this work like Joe Dispenza, all the testimonials of spontaneous healing. In your life, what has fascinated you the most about the full potential of the mind and of consciousness and our capabilities that we're able to espouse when we remember who we are, when we remember that I am self?
I think what's fascinated me by the most is the fact that it's unfathomable, right? Meaning that even with my depth of exploration through meditation, inquiry, just curiosity, reading, profound philosophical conversations with people, we just can't, we really can't grasp the enormity of what it is in terms of human potential, right? And so that it's sort of the mountain without a top, right? Like we ascend, we conquer, we accomplish, we achieve in whatever arena. It could be superficial and material. Somebody gets a promotion in the job, it feels great, right? Or somebody gets married, somebody has a kid. These are all accomplishments that are warranting celebration. But to what degree, we just oblivious to the depth of capacity that we have as human beings? To me, that's what's most fascinating. And I don't think it's anything that we'll ever truly garner or understand. It's sort of literally infinite, which makes the game so fun, right? Because even for myself, having done this work for 3 decades, I continually to go around another corner and discover this new dimension of possibility that was oblivious to me before. And then it's like, holy shit, there's more, and it's this labyrinth that is multidimensional and boundless. So I think that's the most fascinating thing, is that we as a species are just so basic. Like if a civilized, advanced civilization was to land here, like we talk about aliens and UFOs and whatever, it's like the instinctual, unfortunate nature of a human being is to fight, right? Like it's like, oh, let's shoot the spaceships down. That's just how rudimentary the current consciousness of humanity is that we're just primed for fight or flight no matter what. You're in a fight with your partner, the boss calls you into the office, your political party don't win, and it's just you're in a state of rage. It's really, really basic. When people know, or beings know, how to fly around the universe, I'm always like, well, rather than shooting them down, maybe we should just listen. Perhaps they have something to teach us. So yeah, we're really not that advanced. So we've got a long way to go in terms of being able to transcend the primitive, what I call 1.0 mindset, that is the current operating system that has us harm ourselves, harm our loved ones, and harm the planet that we call home. I mean, it's really, you don't have to look at it too deeply to realize that there's a lot of stupidity out there amongst this species, and that's not to use judgment, but rather to encourage awakening, and for really to appeal to people that maybe you just want to stop at least abusing yourself and the loved ones. And if you tell somebody you love them, and maybe just start to see to what degree you're actually living that would be a good start.
When was the last time you sort of found yourself saying, wow, there's more to this. There's more to this game of consciousness than I thought?
Gosh, I mean, hopefully I get to do that quite readily because I'm committed to my own evolution and growth. So I would say, even just over the Christmas holiday, so, a couple of weeks ago, I was looking at the energy of commitment, in my own personal relationships, and recognizing that I had been programmed from a very young age, to really be a silo. My parents both died. I was an only child. And so no one would begrudge me the fact that I've become incredibly independent, and I love my own company. I'm prolifically creative. I've got a million projects going on. I'm writing God knows how many books and doing all the things. So I'm not somebody who typically needs companionship, but I do enjoy it. And I recognize, that my level of commitment wasn't really commitment with somebody. It was more commitment to self and then sharing that with somebody. It's very subtle, but it's different, right? So there's a difference between being in a relationship as the form of it versus being relating, being in the energy of relating. So that was quite profound for me to recognize that even for myself, my level of commitment wasn't what I would assert was true commitment. And that's not wrong, but it opened up a whole new level of affinity and intimacy. And it also helped me recognize that human beings are, unbeknownst to themselves, fully committed, but they're not committed in a way that they think they are. They're fully committed because of their programming, right? So sort of the default setting, they are what people might call self-fulfilling prophecy or self-sabotage. That is because of wiring. And so when you recognize that people are really, truly doing the best they can within the limits of their own conditioning, not only does it breed a lot more compassion and understanding, but it also recognizes that most people, going back to your question about choice, aren't making choices at all. It's all reactions. And so without in any way belittling human beings, most people are just, machines that are reacting to circumstance, whether it be people or situations, in a way that is ultimately just strengthening their own programming, and then wondering why they don't feel free, or that they have any sense of authorship in their life, and wonder why things don't go their way. So that's something that now I really talk a lot about, and I've got a mastermind coming up in February that I'm really going to help people understand that there's no such thing as a not committed human being, which is a radical statement for most people, because people would argue that in relationships, oh, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, they're not committed, or even in their own life, they want to make money or they want to be in shape, but their argument as to why they're not would be, well, I realize I'm lazy. I'm not really committed to my workout. I'm not really committed to my job. But you are, not to what you think you want, but you're committed to the underlying programming. And that's revolutionary for people to see.
When it comes to programming, do you feel like we will always have a degree of programming. It's just that depending on which of the programmings are installed in the software, or can we remove the programming, all of it at once?
I think it's probably both. I just don't think you'd want to do the latter because you'd just be like a ball of plasma, that's got no direction, So program is necessary. I mean, subconscious conditioning that happens from a young age of knowing how to walk, knowing how to pick up a fork and feed yourself with food and brush your teeth and drive a car. These are very useful programmings, or programs that people use every day. So I wouldn't want to completely wipe the hard drive. Somebody would just be a vegetable. I think, if we can cherry pick and just delineate, which of the forms of language and wiring are just self-sabotaging or harmful to oneself, that's where the opportunity lies, is can I just, still enjoy my life and take care of myself, and I love my family and my kids and my job, but I want to do it from a place where I'm not in a state of suffering or resistance, fear and limitation. That would be amazing. So it's an upgrade of programming. It is a rewiring of conditioning, but in a way that, facilitates us maximizing our sense of freedom, joy, possibility, and vitality.
So if we were to take a child or even a baby at the earliest age, what form of programming and codes would you instill at that earliest age in order to lead to that most, I guess, limitless and free human possible?
It's a beautiful question. I don't have kids, so I think, you got to be in it to win it, so to speak. So I would probably, have a different response if I was trying to, facilitate that progression for another being. But I would say before you install programming, you want to uninstall the programming with which they arrived. And my assertion is that the domain of planet Earth, the dimension of being human, is the arena within which we arrive with constraints that we're here to transcend. So just by virtue of being here, if a being is born, my baby or somebody else's, they've arrived with some limitations that they want to be able to discover, investigate, ultimately see and inquire about the validity of and transcend, so that they can discover their own nature. I think that is the opportunity that it is to be human, is to liberate ourselves from the constraints with which we arrive. So if I was a parent or if I was working with a kid, it's going to take a while because they need language, right? All of the conditioning and the wiring is based in vibration and words. So you're not going to be able to do that with a baby who doesn't have the discernment of I'm not good enough, or you don't like me, or I'm less than my sister. That these are the things that people learn in their 3, 5, 7, 9, 10-year-old selves. So it would take a minute to be able to really see how somebody's reacting to their circumstances, help them understand where that comes from, and then, take them through the process of inquiry to see, is it really true that you're less than your brother because he's faster or stronger? He's 2 years older, he's got better biology. So does that mean you're less than, or does that mean you're just where you are? And help them to, through their own reflection, really negate, anything that is a limitation of self. Then typically, you can start to play with what becomes available, right? In the absence of thinking you're not good enough, or you're broken, or you're not loved, or you're not worthy, how could you feel? Then we tap into the imagination of the being that can start to tap into its own inherent qualities of freedom and love and power and worth. And then that would be the gift to give every being. That's what I do, even with 60, 50, 70-year-olds who've been living that way for decades in some sort of limitation, is to help them discover what's on the other side of those constraints. Because everything that we want as a human being is on the other side of our subconscious limitations. So remove the barriers, like, the Rumi quote, seek not for love, but seek rather for the barriers that you've built against it. So remove the barriers and then explore the world that is available on the other side of that. That's the gift that I would give every child. And in my lifetime, that's the gift that I want to give to every human being who happens to come across my work.
I also heard you say once that another of the greatest gifts that you could give to someone is to truly understand their reality. And I want to unpack that for a moment, because it could almost feel very challenging to understand the reality of, for example, a pedophile, a serial killer, so all of these like projections that we put out with a lot of judgment in our society. How would you go about truly understanding the reality of someone that maybe doesn't go with our morals, our values, who we think we are? And you've probably been confronted by working with so many different people across the globe, celebrities to, you know, whoever it is. How do you truly understand someone's reality without falling into judgment of it?
Yeah, that's a tough one with these sort of outliers. You know, we have the main standard deviation of humanity where I would assert most people really are wanting to live a nice life. You know, they want to sort of fall into the dharma of what it is to be a human, have a job, make a difference, raise a family, you know, get married, have some fun, maybe go on vacation, and for the most part have what they would consider to be a good life. You know, when we get into these outliers, it's very difficult. And so I would be less inclined to try and understand someone's behavior and more chalk that up to that's a part of the frequencies that exist in this dimension. And the only time that I think understanding or intervention is appropriate is if somebody's willing to look at themselves, right? So most of the people that are performing these atrocities, for which I don't have any patience really myself, are, yes, conditioned. And typically they are, you know, I don't like the word, but victims of, you know, probably something very similar as they grew up. Even on the very day-to-day, you know, if a husband is a little bit aggressive with his wife or his children, I don't condone that for a minute. I don't think a man should ever raise a hand to a woman or to an animal or to a child. But if you were to investigate the sort of the progression of his own life, you might see that he was beaten a lot by his own dad, right? So I use the expression of there's the language we use, but then there's the language that uses us, right? So right now we're using English. But the language that uses us is typically these deeper subconscious narratives and programs that are how we were conditioned, how we were trained, how we were, you know, sort of manipulated by oftentimes really horrific situations. So I have compassion for it. And I think just with my aptitude, I can have some understanding of why these behaviors might happen. But it's really not my place to try and intervene unless somebody's willing to look at it themselves, right? And that's one of the things that I find challenging for a lot of people out there who want to make a difference, you know, that they feel it's sort of incumbent upon them to go into places and really do this reform, which I have so much, I really admire. But if people aren't willing to do the work, you know, you're literally hitting your head up against the wall. So I've definitely helped a lot of people who've done some pretty horrific things, and they're willing to sort of seek recompense and look at, you know, their behaviors and apologize from, you know, the benign to the really horrific. And then I'm there for it. You know, I will help somebody to clarify and rectify their own behaviors, and where appropriate, you know, seek really professional help if that's what they need. But I think for the most part, you know, these things that we witness that are atrocious and horrific and abhorrent, sometimes I feel they're just there almost as, NPCs, the non-player character or whatever they call it, you know, like they're part of the dimension of human experience, so that we can, if only through reflection, realize who we don't want to be, right? So it's almost through the laws of relativity. If I can see something out there that is so disdainful, that is so heinous, yes, if I'm pulled to try and intervene, and, you know, if it's on the street and I see someone beating up a kid, like, and I'm in, you know, like shooting distance, I can go over there and intervene, I will, you know. But if it's on the other side of the planet because of some of these genocides and all of the horrific things that we see, you know, it just makes me more motivated and inspired to do my work to hopefully mitigate some of the harm and abuse that is inbuilt in the human psyche, so that, albeit maybe not directly, I'm indirectly having an influence on some of the areas that otherwise I wouldn't be able to intervene with.
And it's almost like it has me reflecting, if someone comes to you with an unforgivable act that they desire to work on and get past, there must be something to be said around the space that you hold for that person that even allows that energy to come through. And for someone that might not even have like a Peter Crone in their life, how can they create that space for themselves in order to get beyond what we might see as an unforgivable act in our life?
That's tough. First of all, I have complete and utter compassion and acknowledge somebody who's willing to look at whatever they've done that might have harmed someone or someone's. I think this is where people do default a lot to prayer. I'm not particularly religious. I think religions tend to divide. I would articulate myself more as spiritual, which is for me more unifying. But nonetheless, maybe that's where they start is, whoever your form of a God is or consciousness or the absolute a deity that somebody could feel they can confide in, because I think many humans are suppressed in their ability to express themselves. And so a lot of these atrocities that we see is really just really repressed emotions, the inability to feel seen, heard, and held by a loved one, a parent. And so it can become maladaptive and it gets expressed in these abusive ways. So I think to begin with, if someone can just even pray or write down and maybe go through a ceremony where they burn it if they're willing to really give up a particular behavior. Otherwise, hopefully most people have at least one person that they feel they can confide in, whether it's a best friend, a lover, or even a parent, who is willing to listen to whatever you say with the absence of judgment, which is really difficult for most human beings because, again, part of the conditioning of a human being is really founded in these levels of comparison, which tend to be, ultimately founded in judgment. So, they would be the places I would start if I was somebody who had, performed, immoral acts and hurt people and was feeling, some sort of remorse and shame and wanted to repent. I would start with prayer, asking for forgiveness. And then take steps to reconcile, if there's somebody that I've done harm to, whether it be emotionally, physically, or otherwise, to apologize and seek forgiveness. They may not want to give it, but I'd want to go through the act of at least expressing it. And then if necessary, seek help, get counsel, find a support group or a community that, is there to help people rehabilitate. I mean, we see this from people who go through prison systems, and they come out, they don't know who they are, they don't know where they belong, and they need help. So, yeah, it's a unique question. I've never had that one before, but I guess that's the steps I would take. And really, it all comes down to, I know it sounds cliche, but self-love, right? Is like, can we forgive ourselves? We think forgiveness is really towards others because of what they did, but typically that's sort of an audacious statement. It's like, well, I'm the one that will forgive you for your behaviors. It's like, I didn't get the memo that you're in charge of humanity and how everybody should act. I think forgiveness is really an inside job. None of us have ever been perfect. We've hurt people consciously or unconsciously. And to what degree can we find love and compassion for ourselves and realize that we're doing the best we can? And that doesn't condone behavior, but at least maybe it gives us the chance to have compassion so that we can shift it.
I was having a conversation with a shaman about a while ago, and they were taken to the other side by, these spirit shamans in a ceremony. And one thing that he realized was that the root of a lot of the suffering for humanity comes from a malfunction in thinking, a malfunction in the mind. And I'm wondering and curious to see if you see it in a similar way, and what would be some of those malfunctions that you've identified across humanity.
Yeah, 100%. I think suffering is the inextricable byproduct of subconscious based in limiting narratives, right? So that is the dysfunctional programming, what I'm calling this 1.0 mindset, the old operating system that's currently running humanity, is based in constraints, language that is self-defeating. It's the I'm not good enough, so I'm not loved, I'm not worthy, I'm not wanted, I'm not safe. It's typically what I call a negation of self, meaning it's I'm not something. And so when we, without getting too poetic or esoteric, if who we are is, complete whole beings and that we are the expression of the divine itself, that we're not missing anything. That's our nature. But then if our stories and our conversations are in conflict with that, so if I'm whole, I am loved, but I'm saying I'm not loved, or if I am worthy because it's inherent, but I say that I'm trash, now I'm in a fight with myself. So that dysfunctional language is the precursor to suffering. So that's the simplest way I can break it down, is that yes, who we are with the qualities and characteristics of the soul based in all the attributes that I would assert the ego wants, right? The person wants to be loved, sexy, beautiful, admired, accepted. The person wants to be valued and seen as some sort of worthy, human. The ego wants to have a sense of peace and security. These are all the desires, but it's built on top of a fabric of conditioning that's based in the negation of those, right? Like, I want love, but I'm not lovable because I've got the evidence that my parents told me that I was a mistake, or, I'm not enough because I didn't get A's on all of my, scorecards at school, and my dad would always point it out. And so now the being that is inherently enough is now up against the conversation of the human that is, I am not enough. And so now you have to be in a state of dis-ease. So that is, to me, the precursor to suffering. Yeah, that's the dissolution process. That's what I'm undoing. Going back to your question about how would I raise a kid, I would recognize what are their negations of self and help them see they're not truths. They're just absolutely not true. And then you discover freedom on the other side of that. And there's no greater experience for any human.
Very powerful awareness there. And just to circle back on our conversation around commitment and relationships, I went into, your presence on social media and the messages that you put out. And one of those that has really resonated with masses of people has been the following. You said that we don't fall in love with the other person. We fall in love with the version of us that we get to be through and with the other person. And I'd love to really unpack that, because there's a lot of power in there, especially because relationships are one of the major factors that either challenge us, push us to grow, help us see ourselves. So what do you really mean when we fall in love with a version of us that we're with to be through with another person?
Yeah, it's a beautiful statement, and I would even, relative to that video that got a lot of attention, I'd add a little something, which of course is to, that's a very short clip in a live event that I was doing, right? And a lot of these things get miscontextualized because, we're putting up a minute, 1.5 minute, 90-second clip, from a 25-minute conversation. So it's in no way to dismiss the beauty of companionship, right? Like, when we fall in love with somebody, I think there's something to really be celebrated and honored in the partnership itself. But really the point that obviously resonated with, millions of people who watched it is to go, wow, it really is the revelatory process of falling in love with someone. It brings to the surface a version of me that is alive, that is vital, that feels, joy, that feels anything is possible. And that to me is what is the most seductive, and I mean it in a positive way, part of falling in love, is that we get to be a version of ourselves that typically we either didn't know was available, or that we become so resigned to the fact that we were single, or relationships didn't work, or our job wasn't what we wanted. And then we've all had it, or I hope most people have had that experience of love. And then we just tap into this sort of boundless feeling of joy. The circumstances of our life, our bank account balance is still the same. And yet we have this euphoric feeling as we walk through the day, and so that's really what I'm pointing to is, and it's twofold, right? It's the joy of like unveiling a more vibrant, vital, and alive version of ourselves, which I would assert is what we're here to discover. And simultaneously, for people who've been in relationships that were difficult, that were heartbreaking, to be able to disassociate, not in a way that's spiritually bypassing, but just to really detach from the illusion that your love was over there with them, right? Because there's many people who go through heartache because of a divorce or because of a broken relationship. And then they're all of a sudden thinking, that their love is really, associated with that person that they were with. And now they become trapped. And, it can go on for months, years, where I'm never going to find anyone like, X, fill in that blank. And so that's also where I think a lot of people found immense relief, is to go, oh my God, it wasn't about them. It was about who they were as a catalyst and the source of inspiration for me to discover how loving I am. And again, not to dismiss the presence of the other person. There's beautiful relationships out there that are co-created, but it really gives people the opportunity to see, especially on the back of a breakup, that they can take that love elsewhere. Like, they didn't lose love. They really, discovered love through that relationship. And that's something to be grateful for, and to be able to perpetuate into every arena of their life, and not to use relationships as the excuse as to why you're either full of life or dead to life, because then you're just a victim of circumstance. So I think that's what, why a lot of people really resonated with that clip, is they're like, wow, and it really sort of speaks to the fabric of life. It's not so much just even a person that can elicit that internal sense of, true ecstatic joy, but it could be, the birth of a grandchild or the birth of a child. It could be a new job. It could be the start of a new location where someone's moved to, that you can bring, whatever sense of love that you want to life, versus most people live in a world where they're waiting for an excuse to experience that. And that's why I love that so many people, were moved by that clip, because it really puts people in the driving seat of their own life, as opposed to being a victim of circumstance and waiting to fall in love, or waiting for good news, or waiting for the promotion. It's like, no, you are the author of your own experience, and the degree to which you're aware of that is the degree to which you can then bring that sense of true joy, that sense of true possibility, love and affection, intimacy and possibility to all arenas of your life. It's not dependent on whether, you just met someone at the local supermarket who you find smoking hot and, you're excited about. That's fun, but it's not contingent on that.
What have heartbreaks taught you the most about yourself?
What is what? I missed the...
Sorry, I'm like clearing my throat here.
No, that's okay.
What have heartbreaks taught you the most about yourself?
Gosh, so much. I mean, for me particularly, and I think I can probably speak on behalf of the collective, I think romantic relationships are the best catalyst for growth and evolution if you're willing to look at them. For me personally, my very first real love was when I started my career. This is now going back, almost 30 years. I was in a relationship. My parents had died. And so this, for me, at the time, was the next best version of love, that I'd experienced, aside from my own care providers of mum and dad. And so it had a lot of significance because my mum and dad had died. And so when I met this girl with the usual sparks, and it was very, very cliche, across a crowded room, and I didn't know who she was. I knew she had a boyfriend very quickly after I'd fallen in love. So that was like a big barrier to entry. And I was like, holy shit, how do I overcome that? But anyway, life saw fit to make sure that, she moved on and she came back to me and we started this life together. And so the first heartbreak was when she left me about a year and a half later. And I sort of, like a lot of people, fell apart a little bit. I couldn't sleep. I was calling friends. What do I do? How do I get her back? And all of the typical, I wouldn't say I was quite desperate, but I was definitely hurt. And it took a while. It was about 6, 7, 8 weeks later. And I had this big revelation, which really, again, to my point earlier about the love, falling in love with not the person, but the version of you with that person. I thought, I'd lost this girlfriend. And of course, there's even friends who, in the most loving way, are, confiding their commiserations with you about your loss. And it's just all reinforcing the pain, right? But what I realized is actually, I was sitting in my room having this incessant conversation with my own mind about where is she? Is she dating someone else? Will I see her again? Will I find love like that again? All of these sort of unanswerable questions that were at times literally keeping me up at night. And then I realized the answer to all of the questions. And the answer was, I don't know. Like, where is she? I don't know. Is she dating someone else? I don't know. Will I find love like that again? I don't know. Will I see her again? I don't know. And that was just the truth. And it was so profoundly obvious that literally shifted the course of my life, my career. I started my own business, doing what I'm doing now. And I realized that the nature of life is uncertainty. But by virtue of being human, living in a state of fear, we're always trying to find certainty. We're always trying to figure shit out. because we're programmed to make it, right? And so at that moment in my life, I experienced peace and freedom in a way that I didn't even know was possible. So that was the first, and I would say the most profound form of heartbreak that had, contributed to my evolution. But there's been refinements along the way with other relationships. And, for me, a big one was like realizing I never had any boundaries. I was just such a loving, open, what I thought nice guy, which I was, but it was a form of kind of facade niceness, in as much as I was doing what I thought I should do to keep the other person happy, which is still, a form of me trying to be the nice guy, as opposed to just, honor my values, so it wasn't, I didn't judge myself once I saw it. I was like, oh, wow, that's actually not that nice, because I'm, not taking care of myself. I'm being taken advantage of, or even at times I would say verbally abused, people saying some really horrific things that aren't very nice. But I just developed such a bandwidth that I was able to even have compassion, like I learned a lot from the expression of "forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do." I pull tenets from different religions. I'm not religious. And I think I tried to embody that one too much, as opposed to just realize that this is toxic and harmful, and not, withstand somebody's anger that had nothing to do with me. That was in their system for decades before they even knew I existed. So I've learned a lot from relationships, and I'm very grateful, and I have an immense amount of gratitude and love for all of my partners that I've had through the course of my life thus far. And they really have been the conduit for my own growth, and I continue to refine my work courtesy of it, which then helps me to touch the lives of millions of people. So there are a couple of examples. I hope that helps and resonates with the audience.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story, brother. Really appreciate it. And also for someone kind of going through it right now, definitely really, really helpful to hear that perspective. And in this realization of, I don't know, you almost came to another gnosis within that is that the nature of reality is uncertain and unknown. And a lot of people can either thrive like you did, starting the business and moving on in that way. And a lot of people can crumble in the face of that uncertainty. What differentiates the two paths that are taken when we realize that we're in this unknown, this soup of who knows what's going to happen next? Like a lot of people are, especially with the future and what's going on in the world and the news. How do you determine that difference between thriving and collapsing in the face of uncertainty?
It comes down to the individual and their own karma and whatever they're here to, transcend and discover. But ultimately, the way I delineate it is, I write quotes and I say that uncertainty to the ego creates fear, but uncertainty to the soul is pure possibility. So it really comes down from what particular perspective are you looking from, right? If you're looking through the lens of victimhood and woe is me as this isolated unit who experiences separation, then uncertainty is going to be a threat. It is going to be scary. But if you recognize that you're part of the whole and look from the perspective of the unified field, that I am taken care of, that I am, I jokingly say a trust fund baby. I wasn't left a penny by my parents that passed, but, I trust in the universe. And so when you look from that perspective, then uncertainty has a different flavor. It's exciting, it's explorative, it's adventurous, and it, as I said, is pure possibility. So it all depends, as I said, from where you're looking.
Yeah, it's switching the perspectives. Easier said than done sometimes.
It is.
When the human experience feels so real, right?
It does, yeah. We become so identified with, I would say, I literally do say in one of my quotes, it's the ultimate addiction, the idea of ourself. And so that's all we've known. It's very familiar. The unknown can seem scary, but it's not that the unknown is scary, because the unknown is unknown. So there's actually no fear in there. The fear that people feel is the demise of their current identity. Who would I be in the absence of thinking that I am, fill in the blank, so that can be, that is a death, right? And that's scary, but it's, I would say, the most liberating thing anyone can do is to constantly die to the current iteration of themselves. That is evolution, versus trying to refine the current version of themselves, which is what most humans do, which you've probably heard me say is when you become the best version of your limited self. And when people really get that, it's quite profound.
How frequently can the death of our identity happen in a way that is not going to completely shatter our life, for example? Like, because there is this special thing about seeing each version of ourselves through to the very end, like in cycles. Yeah, what are your reflections on that?
Every 5.5 days.
every 7 years and a half.
Yeah.
Which 7 years, Richard Rudd from the Gene Keys, he talks about, especially Gene Key 29, which the gift is commitment, CD is devotion, and the shadow is half-heartedness. He talks a lot about cycles in that Gene Key.
Yeah.
Every 7 years, our cells die. We're literally new people every 7 years.
Yeah, and there are certain systems within the body that are much more, obviously turn over a lot quicker than that, within days, like red blood cells and some of the lining of our mouth and all of that. But I feel, the answer to your question without being flippant and joking is like, it's how long is a piece of string? It's all up to the individual and their karma. And so I think, it's important that people understand that for some, they might go through, some version of death, multitude of times in 1 year. And for somebody else, it might take 5 or 6 years. And there's no right answer. I would trust the process of whatever it is that you're here to, look at. Certainly we can, I think the only thing we can do, which would still be built into the conditioning of that person, is to sort of prolong the current version, right? Like by resisting wanting to transcend the current constraint. I know for me as a kid, I used to hate, like with a passion, throwing up, right? It was something that, I don't know, I would get really upset by it. And I know it's not something that most people really enjoy, but I would do everything I could to resist it. And looking back, I can realize now, if I had a bellyache or I'd eaten some, sketchy food or whatever it is that creates the body's reaction to want to vomit, I was practicing pranayama, as a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old. Like I didn't know that, I just knew that if I really controlled my breathing, I could resist vomiting. What I didn't know is that all I was doing was pushing the toxins further into my body, right? And so they would manifest eventually in something, a skin irritation, or, like really having diarrhea at some, point a few days later, or whatever it is. So I think, that's something to look at, as to what degree can we not resist what seems inevitable as best as possible, right? Like, nobody wants to go through the figurative, throwing up of karma and constraints. It's unpleasant and it can hurt, and it can lead to, the end of relationships, the end of careers. It could manifest as a sickness. I think resistance is probably the number one contributing factor to perpetuating suffering. Suffering is inevitable, but resistance amplifies it and perpetuates it. So the degree to which we can accept our fate, if somebody really is in a relationship and their partner's, done, can you find, as hard as it is, a deep sense of profound surrender and acceptance, as opposed to just fighting and resisting and, defending, and, that just becomes exhausting. So I don't know the definitive time frame for when people can die.
We'll stay with 5.5 days. We'll stick with that one.
That might seem a little much for some people. They're like, whoa, could I just get a break? Can I just enjoy this current iteration of myself? It's actually pretty good. It's definitely an upgrade from my last version. I'd like to maybe enjoy this for a few months. So yeah, it's subtle. And I think there's different iterations of death, right? Some are very refined and subtle, and some are like really fucking painful. So I think there's also, it runs the gamut. There's a gradient of the types of death. One might be a subtle belief system that you had, and one might be like, through every cell of your body that you have to somatically experience. So I just invite people to not resist it, and to realize that there's always going to be some relief and epiphanies on the other side of it.
There's a lot of beauty in it, to say the least. And you've mentioned karma quite a bit in this conversation. I'm curious to know what your understanding of karma is from the way that you've approached it in your life.
Yeah, for me, I think like a lot of people, I used to look at it through a moralistic lens of good and bad, that's bad karma. And I think that evolved into realizing it's really just an expression of physics, cause and effect. It's like I grab this bottle of water and electrolytes, I drink, there's an action, which is going to lead ultimately to a reaction, which is, my kidneys are going to sort of filter out whatever water and waste. And I'll have to go to the men's room, and that's karma. So that's the sort of the simplest definition in terms of physics. Obviously, it gets more complicated when you look at the deeper patterns of karma in somebody's psyche. If somebody's looking through a lens of they're not good enough, then it also has cause and effect, right? Because what that might mean is that their maladaptive way of reacting to that is to become a people pleaser, right? To try and placate, friends and loved ones in a way that they do feel good enough, or they feel like they're part of the gang. So it's still karma, but it's going to manifest in a way that is not just, having to go and use the restroom after drinking, but, they might get Hashimoto's disease after years of trying so hard to be a perfectionist. That's still karma, but it's built on, the foundation of some feeling of inadequacy that over years is going to manifest in exhaustion somehow, or unfulfilled realizations in the workplace, or, being taken advantage of in relationships. And so it's still, for me, physics is just a subtler form of physics, because a lot of people are oblivious to these deeper karmas of how they delineate themselves.
Powerful.
Yeah.
What has been your secret to seeing the preciousness in everybody that you meet?
That's a beautiful question. I don't want to sound too cringe, but I'd say by having been blessed to see the beauty of myself, and then to recognize there's no difference, and to really, without again wishing to sound too philosophical, to realize that everybody else is an extension of that which I am, so there's no difference. And so I think as long as anybody looks through the lens of any sort of self-deprecating language that they're horrible, they're trash, they're not loved, they're not wanted, they're going to look at other people from that perspective, right? So either they're going to see the same in another person, which is, the perpetuation of suffering, or they're going to see other people as the excuse for their own limitation, right? Oh, that person's so much nicer than me, so much more beautiful. And I think once we get beyond all of these limiting narratives, and we tap into the essence of our own divinity and see the preciousness of life itself, we get to afford that to other people. We get to naturally extend that to another being. It's really the definition of namaste, right? Like the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. And that used to be a word that I could say, and I understood its definition. But now I feel fortunate that it's an experience that I actually have.
Yeah. That wasn't cringe at all, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, okay, good. Hopefully a lot of people can feel that. And so it just reinforces the opportunity that it is to sort of inquire as to who am I, the self-discovery, the self-realization, and to realize, to what degree do you really honor and revere, the life that you are? To what degree can you recognize the beauty that it is just to be you, to be alive? And when you really tap into that, I think that is, to go back to that clip that you cited about falling in love, is really, that is self-love. It is the opportunity, as far as I'm concerned, to be human, is to transcend the limits with which we arrived, to recognize the true essence of who we are. That to me is the meaning of life.
What do you feel also is that ultimate game of this human experience from the soul's perspective? I know you've said it in many different variations throughout the conversation, but if you could distill it down to the ultimate game that we're here to experience, what is that for you?
Well, as I happen to have here, because this is where I do my mastermind, I have a piece of paper that I read to people, and I say at the beginning, everything and I mean literally everything in life is solely for the purpose of liberating the soul you are. Nothing else matters. Realize that all fear and suffering is made up, and nothing on the human level is important aside from that one objective. To get caught up in the human drama is to miss the entire point of being human.
To get caught up in the human drama.
So that to me is everything is in life is purely for the purpose of liberating the soul you are.
I'll also read another quote of yours here that came through in a co-creation with One Golden Thread that I saw that says, "The soul that I am is curating the events necessary for me to reveal the limiting contexts so that I'm here to transcend, so that I can liberate myself and realize I am freedom itself." I am freedom itself. Mm-hmm. So powerful.
Yeah. And that's, with my work, I recognize there's these different stages of evolution. We come from this place of really thinking, something that we are that is derogatory, right? So it might be in language, I'm trash, I'm worthless. Like a lot of people can feel that. That's a really, that's a dark iteration of our potential, right? That we're looking through a lens where we are declaring ourselves as something that is negative, that then we can evolve into, slightly, not still fun, but it's a slightly better version is, where we think we're not something, right? Like I'm not loved, that's a horrible place to live, but it's not as bad as I'm trash, right? And eventually, I take people through these different stages again in the mastermind, and we get to the impersonal experience of the soul, right? It's no longer personified. It's not like I am, it's just there is. And so that I am freedom itself is a declaration of an essence, of a quality. It's not something that I possess as Peter Crone. It's really what is at the fabric and the foundation of my entire existence.
Wow. Peter Crone, we end every episode with a segment called The Final Trio, which are some questions that we ask at the very end. Before that, where would you like to send people to connect further with your work, people that are maybe new to you or just want to follow up with what you're creating in the world? Where would you send people?
Well, thank you for the invitation. They can find me just, Google my name, my website, petercrone.com. All my social is just my name. So Instagram @PeterCrone. Facebook, TikTok, it's all basically, it's pretty easy. It's just Peter Crone. So I would love for people to come and check it out if they feel inspired. My most powerful offering is my 3.5-month mastermind, where I teach all of this theory that I've been speaking about, and I coach 40 to 50 people across 35 hours that I lead. It's I would assert it is the most powerful journey anyone can go on.
Beautiful. We'll link everything down in the show notes as always. And these final 3 questions, the first 2 are personalized to each guest. The last one we ask at the end of every show. Okay. The first one I had for you is, what has softened your nervous system over the years that you're most grateful for?
What has softened in my nervous system over the years that I'm most grateful for? I probably think, it goes way back because I've had this now, fortunately, for a while, but the belief that I have to make things happen, right? Which creates this feeling of force versus like power, right? Like that's one of the things I work with, a lot of my high-end performers is distinguishing the difference between force and power. Force has got a lot of tension, cost, manipulation. It's a bit destructive. And so when I shifted for myself from being, I wouldn't even say I was ever forceful. I've always been a little bit of a nice guy. So I was never even in a fight in a bar or any of that. But, just in my own life circumstances, wanting to try and get things to happen versus trusting the unfolding of life just allowed me to go from that state of trying to figure it out, trying to control everything, to just allowing things to unfold in the perfect timing.
Powerful teaching again. The second question I had for you is, when things start to get noisy in the external, especially this year, there's going to be a lot of things happening and unfolding before our eyes. what is always available inside of us that you would always return back to?
If I was to put it in one word or two words, I'd say total peace. I think one of the illusions of the ego and the human beings being programmed to think that we are who we are because of our circumstances, certainly the way we feel, is because of what happened, right? Someone's in a bad mood. They're like, what happened? Oh, well, my wife, my husband, my boss, it's always something external. And so it makes sense that from that perspective, what happens is human beings invariably try to control everything because, of course, if you think that the way you feel is because of your circumstances, it's only natural that you're going to try and control circumstances because you want to control how you feel. But that's the cart before the horse. What I teach people is help them to understand that no matter the state of circumstances, that peace and freedom is always available to you. And I would assert that's actually the only way to truly live a powerful life, is to realize you're not a victim of circumstance. You're actually always just being a victim of your own perspective of circumstance, and that you have some say over. So no matter how noisy it gets, the real noise is in your conversation about circumstance, and that you can listen to unaffected.
That'll be played back a few times for sure.
Yeah. Rewind. What?
Total peace. This last question we ask at the end of every single episode, it's called the time capsule question. Mm-hmm. And it requires us to move out a little bit out into the future, around 15 to 20 years down the line.
Okay.
The reason I chose out those timeframes is because I believe that's going to be a time in human history when the young generations of today are going to be stepping more into leadership positions around the world. And just like any great leader that's had great resources, great access to mentors and teachers, great support from people that have come before us, you had the opportunity to leave something behind in a time capsule, for that when these leaders are ready, these young generations, when they're ready to take on these bigger responsibilities in the world and truly lead humanity into this next chapter, this next era, many are calling the golden age. What would you like to leave behind? It could be something physical or also non-physical, a message, a teaching, a word, a phrase, a verb, a poem, whatever feels natural to you. But what would you leave behind to the next generation of leaders?
That's a beautiful question and invitation. I hope by then I could leave behind at least a dozen books. I've still got to finish the first one. Many of my followers, they're definitely having to challenge their ability to be not a victim of circumstance waiting for my book.
It's almost there. It's almost there.
So I would say, I have a series of books that I'm working on. So hopefully those. But if I were to leave, kind of the image when you say a time capsule, I see it more sort of like this futuristic fortune cookie, that someone could open one day. And I'd probably just say, remember that, your true nature is freedom, love, and possibility, as it is for everybody else, and to lead from those qualities, to realize that the biggest illusion is that you're separate from anything or anyone else. And that if the entire scope of the world around you was an extension of you, how would you treat it? That something along those lines.
Just sprinkle that nugget of wisdom in there.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, Peter Crone, I just wanted to also acknowledge you for going so personal with me and in our community, and also for the work that you've been doing throughout these decades that are really changing the needle, shifting the needle for so many people and millions of people around the world. It's my highest honor. I feel this is the first of many connections and collaborations and co-creations. And thank you again for all the beauty and the wisdom that you bring to this world. I really appreciate it.
Emilio, thank you, my friend. Again, it's a joy to meet you, having never spoken to you before. And in ways that I don't know what you've been through, I can see the kind of man you've become. I know a little bit about, the fact your mom was a yoga teacher, so you obviously incarnated into a pretty special home. But I can, see, and I want to futuristically acknowledge you for the difference you're going to make that even you don't know yet. So I can see that's part of your timeline.
Thank you for seeing that, brother. Until next time.
Indeed.